Hello and welcome. This is part 2 of my 2 videos that I'm making about frequency distributions in our elementary statistics course. Okay, in part 1 I went over the slides, the lecture slides that come with our book. But in this second video I'm going to be giving you kind of a tutorial on how to do our homework problems. And remember that our quiz and exam questions are based on the homework. So it really pays to do your homework and understand it. Okay, so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to help you with some new formulas that you're going to find very helpful when you're doing your homework. So remember that our homework is over My Math Lab, aka My Lab and Mastering. Okay, so that's going to be, actually let me just switch to this view right here. Okay, so here's so we can see it before I put my overlay over it. This is question number 2 on your homework from 2.1. It says identify the lower class limits, upper class limits, the class width, the class midpoints, and class boundaries for the given frequency distribution. Also identify the number of individuals included in the summary. So the reason I'm making this video is make sure you've already watched my first video from 2.1, which sort of talks about a lot of things like the lower class limits and upper class limits. But when you're actually doing this homework question, you're probably going to find that you're going to need some more formulas, in particular for class midpoints and class boundaries. Okay, so for class midpoints and class boundaries, when we get to those, I will show you some pretty straightforward but useful formulas that for some reason don't show up in our book, at least not in the PowerPoint slides that I covered in my other video. All right, so taking a look at their first question here, the first question is to identify the lower class limits. Okay, so identify the lower class limits. So remember that the lower class limits are actually obtained by really just looking at this table. It's already been constructed. The lower class limits are represented by the numbers on the left of each class. So the first lower class limit is going to be 25. Sorry, I know the colors look a little weird on this setting, but I found that this is the best way for you to actually be able to read the screen. Okay, so our lower class limits are going to be 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, and 55. So we're just literally going to type those in here. So in order, we start with 25, and then 30, and then 35, 40, 45, 50, and then the last lower class limit is 55. So that's pretty straightforward. You type that into all those boxes, and then you're going to click check answer on the bottom right corner of the screen. Fantastic, that means we got that part right. Okay, next part, identify the upper class limits. So remember that the upper class limits are actually the numbers on the right here. So each number on the right represents an upper class limit, and they've already been made in this table. So we literally just need to type in all the numbers on the right in increasing order. Okay, so let's do that. Upper class limits are going to start with 29. So we're going to have 29, and then we have 34, and then 39, and so forth. 44, 49, 54, and 59. And then once we've typed them all in, make sure we typed them in correctly, then we click check answer. It said good job, okay. Next thing is the class width. Now I know on my other video, for the class width, we said that there was a complicated formula that you probably wouldn't use in your homework, but I taught you the complicated formula just in case you're interested in doing actual statistics from scratch. Now, the thing about this problem is we're not going to be using that complicated formula. We can just figure out the class width by looking at the lower class limits, and we can subtract. So here the formula we're going to use for class width. I'm going to write CW, that stands for class width. It's just going to equal the difference between two consecutive lower class limits. So I can just do lower class limit number 2 minus lower class limit number 1, and that will give me the class width. So what I'm saying is class width is going to be LCL2 minus LCL1. So lower class limit number 2 minus lower class limit number 1. And the reason the formula is simpler here is because they've already constructed this table. Okay, so what's that going to look like here? Well, looking back at the actual problem, we'll notice that lower class limit number 2 is 30, and lower class limit number 1 is 25. So that's actually going to be 30 minus 25, which is 5. Okay, so on this problem, our class width, CW, our class width is 5. Pretty straightforward, right? So once you know that, that makes that pretty easy. So going back to the actual problem, we click here where it says identify the class width, and we're just going to type in 5, and then we click check answer on the bottom right corner. It says excellent, so we got that. Okay, now the next thing we do not have a formula for yet. If you watch my other video, we did not get a formula yet. So I'm going to go ahead and give us a formula for class midpoints. Now, I did mention in my other video from 2.1 that the class midpoints are halfway between the lower class limit and the upper class limit for that class. So right now, I'm going to give you the real formula for class midpoint. So the formula for class midpoint is it's just going to be the average of the lower class limit and the upper class limit. So that means you do the lower class limit for that class, and then you add the upper class limit, and then you divide the result by 2, and that gives you the class midpoint. Okay, so here's the formula. I'm going to write CM, that stands for class midpoint, and it equals lower class limit plus upper class limit divided by 2. And some people may be able to do these in their head, but other people will want to use a calculator. I personally like to use a calculator just to check and make sure if I did it in my head that I did it correctly. But this is for each class. So let's start with the first class here. Okay. So for the first class, we can see that the lower class limit is 25 and the upper class limit is 29. Remember, the first class is the same as the first row of our frequency table. So lower class limit is 25, upper class limit is 29. So that means class midpoint number 1 for the one that we're doing, I'll write CM1, is going to be 25, which is the lower class limit, plus 29, which is the upper class limit, divided by 2. So on a calculator, make sure you do the addition first, and then you divide by 2. So if you want to type it in all at once, the calculator may give you the wrong answer. So if you wanted to type it in all at once, you would have to put parentheses around the numerator. And some calculators don't even have a parentheses button. But yeah, that's how you would type it in all at once. Or if you want to just do it in 2 steps, like I said, if you don't have parentheses on your calculator, you'll just do 25 plus 29, either in your head or on your calculator, and that gives you 54. And then either in your head or on your calculator, 54 divided by 2 is 27. So that means class midpoint number 1 is 27. Okay? And I'm not going to write it out for all the rest of them. But so then if we go back to our homework here, the first class midpoint that we found goes in the first box, which is 27. And then how do we quickly calculate the rest of them without having to write it down? Well, that's what a calculator is for, really. But I'll tell you another trick, which is if you don't want to keep using this big formula here over and over again, lower class limit plus upper class limit divided by 2, what you can do is once you have class midpoint number 1, you can repeatedly add the class width to find all the other class midpoints, which is nice. It makes it a lot easier than having to use this formula over and over again. So really, if you wanted to, you could just do class midpoint number 1 is lower class limit number 1 plus upper class limit number 1 divided by 2, and we got 27. And then what you do is you repeatedly add the class width, either in your head or on your calculator, to get the other all class midpoints. I'll just write CMs. Okay, so you repeatedly add the class width to this first class midpoint to get all the other class midpoints. So how's that going to work? Well, it's really pretty straightforward. So we started with 27. Okay, so to get the other ones, remember that the class width here is listed as 5. So our class width here is 5. So that means we're just going to keep adding 5 to 27 to get all the other class midpoints. Okay, so the first one on my calculator, 27 plus 5 is 32. So I type in 32, and then I'm just going to keep adding 5 over and over again, because that's the class width, to get all the class midpoints. So 32 plus 5 is 37. Oops, 37. 37 plus 5 is 42. 42 plus 5 is 47. 47 plus 5 is 52. And then 52 plus 5 is 57. Okay, and then we've entered those all in, so we do check answer. Well done. Okay, and then we've got class boundaries. This is this is another thing that I wish they had formulas for on the slides that I did in part 1 of my video, but we don't have that. So I'm going to have to give you a formula for this one. So I should have been erasing this board. Let me go ahead and erase that right now. If you want to watch me, just spray this stuff onto this light board and then I erase it. Very exciting, huh? Well, you know what, while we're waiting, I think I need to start telling jokes because I've heard that these videos are very boring. Granted, I'm not a comedian, so my jokes might not be that funny, but so I wanted to tell a joke right now. So here we go. How much does a roof cost? How much does a roof cost? And the answer is nothing. It's on the house. Okay? So I'll be telling dad jokes. I'm going to try to tell more of them during the videos to make the videos a little bit more bearable. I know they can get boring doing all this stuff, math and science. Okay, so anyway, we're talking about now class boundaries. So what is the formula for finding the first class boundary? Well, actually, all you have to do to find the first class boundary the formula is going to be CB1 equals the first lower class limit minus 0.5. Okay, so CB1 equals LCL1 minus 0.5. And we already talked about what class boundaries represent. They're basically supposed to be midway between an upper class limit of a class and then the lower class limit of the next class. Okay? So anyway, regardless of the meaning of it, this is the formula for the first one. So class boundary number 1 is lower class limit number 1 minus 0.5. So on this problem, let's see what our lower class limit number 1 was. Lower class limit number 1 is this first number, which is 25. Okay? So our first class boundary is going to be 25 minus 0.5. Okay? And then either on your calculator or in your head, you're going to get 25 minus 0.5 is 24.5. So that's class boundary number 1. Okay, so we can go ahead and type that in on our homework. Just a disclaimer though, even though I'm doing question number 2 on your homework, these questions are randomly generated. So you will probably get somewhat different numbers each time you do these questions because the numbers are randomly generated, you're not always going to get the same ones that I get on the video when I'm doing an example. Okay, so that's how we find the first class boundary. We just took the first lower class limit and subtracted 0.5. So then the question is, how do we find all the other class boundaries? Well, you could use that formula. I mean, you could just subtract 0.5 from every single lower class limit if you wanted to. But another way that I like to do is, and it's pretty mindless, is to get all the other class boundaries, you just repeatedly add the class width. Just the same way you would when you wanted to find all the lower class limits, all the upper class limits, or all of the class midpoints. You just find the first one using the formula, and then to get the rest of them, you repeatedly add the class width. So repeatedly add the class width to find all of the other class boundaries. Which is nice that all of these different things that we're calculating for our tables, once you find the first one, for all of them, you just repeatedly add the class width, and that will give you the rest of them. So here, we start with 24.5, and then on this problem, remember that the class width was 5. So on our calculator, we're just going to be doing 24.5 plus the class width of 5, and then we'll just keep adding 5 to fill in all the boxes. Okay, so let's start. 24.5 plus 5 will give us our second class boundary, which is 29.5. Okay, and then we'll just keep adding that class width of 5 to get all the rest of these. So 29.5 plus 5 is 34.5. And then 34.5 plus 5 is 39.5. 39.5 plus 5 is 44.5. 44.5 plus 5 is 49.5. 49.5 plus 5 is 54.5. And then 54.5 plus 5 is 59.5. So just like all of these other things that we calculated, like the class midpoints and the lower class limits and the upper class limits, you can very easily just use the formula to get the first class boundary, and then you repeatedly add the class width to find all of the other ones. Okay, so check answer, nice work. Okay, and then there's just one more thing that we need to go over here. But the slides don't, my other video doesn't completely cover. So we kind of have already seen this when we did relative frequencies, but they're asking us to identify the number of individuals included in the summary. That last box there is our last question, to identify the number of individuals included in the summary. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to identify the number of individuals? Well, remember when we were doing the relative frequency and we had to divide by the sum of all frequencies? Remember, sum means you add up all the frequencies? Well, the sum of all frequencies is the same as the number of data values. So like in our example on in my other video from 2.1, we found that there were a total of 50 individuals in the summary, or 50 data values. But we also got 50 by just adding up all the frequencies. So we can do the same thing here. Okay? So looking at these frequencies, we just need to add up all these numbers on our calculator. So we just add up this entire column, and that will give us the number of individuals included in the summary. Okay, so actually let me just go to my camera so I can write down the formula for you. So number of individuals is just another way of saying the number of data values. Okay. And the letter that we're going to be using for that is called N. Okay, so N is, this letter is going to represent the number of individuals, which is the same as the number of data values. And the formula that we're going to use here is N equals the sum of all frequencies. Sum of all frequencies. Okay, so when they say the number of individuals in the summary, that's the same as the number of data values, which is the same as N. We're going to be calling it N for the rest of the semester. And when you have a frequency table, that's also equal to the sum of all the frequencies. So like going back to our problem that we're doing here, we can see that the frequencies in the table are 28, 34, 16, 3, 4, 1, 2. Okay, so let me write those out. So we've got 28 plus 34 plus 16 plus 3 plus 4 plus 1 plus 2. That's going to be the sum of all frequencies. That's not quite the button I meant to press. Hold on. Okay. So, sum of all frequencies. That's just adding up everything in that column. That's the same as the number of data values. So then we add these up either in our head or maybe on our calculator just to check our work. So 28 plus 34 plus 16 plus 3 plus 4 plus 1 plus 2. That gives us n equals 88. So that means there were 88 individuals or 88 data values in the summary. Okay. All right, so then once we realize that, all we have to do is type it in. Okay, and so we just type in 88 for the number of individuals included in the summary, check answer, and boom, we're done. Okay, so I think between my other video and this video, you should be pretty good for this section. So if you look at these other questions in your homework, you're going to find that they're pretty much the same setup. Okay, so question number 3, question number 4, those are the same setup. And then my other video you should watch to be able to do question number 5, 6, and 7. And then also question number 1. Because question number 1 is asking for relative frequency. So for that one, you're going to need to use the formula from the other video. Okay? So anyway, thank you for watching, and that completes part 2 of our video from 2.1. So 2.1 is a big section, and part of the reason I made 2 videos is just because there's so much to cover. Hopefully that's helpful. So hopefully everyone can do well on their homework. Okay? All right, bye.